Okay, we're going to take a look at spears and spears in antiquity.
Attitude. Hey, how you doing? This nigga.
No, not that spears. That's Aries Spears the comedian. I'm talking about real spears attached to a pole. All began from sharpened sticks and then finding out how to make cutting blades and actually like skinning knives and things out of obsidian and sharper stone, and then somebody stuck that on the end of a stick. Spears. You know, spears like over here on the right, all these different pole arms they used to have, and indeed there's a lot of them up through medieval times. Each one even had their own like specific purpose. Certain blades on the end, spikes. Certain ones had a pommel on the bottom end of it, and then at the top would have a certain type of spear that had catchers on the side of it, and it was really meant to pick riders off of horses. You would plant it into the ground as a horse rider came by and stick it up. It would take the longer sticks, like the longest one that you see there. So, spear is a pole weapon consisting of a shaft, usually of wood, with a pointed head. The head may be simply the sharpened end of the shaft itself. Sometimes they used to cook those and harden it and so on, and this is way back in caveman times. Um, as is the case with fire hardened spears, as they say. It may be made of a more durable material fastened to the shaft, such as flint, obsidian, later, of course, iron, steel, or bronze. The most common design for hunting or combat spears since ancient times has been incorporated a metal spearhead shaped like a triangle, a lozenge, or a leaf blade, kind of like a giant arrowhead, but very slender. These heads of fishing spears usually feature barbs or serrated edges on them to catch into the creature, whereas you want your polearm back in a weapon, and they are always tapered to release. But, well, not always. The word spear comes from Old English spare, or from the Proto Germanic spere, which all comes from a Proto Indo European root, spare, or spear, which means pole. Now, Proto Indo Europeans, of course, we know of as what we would call the Aryans. Spears can be divided into two broad categories. These are designed for thrusting in melee combat up close and using them like a bow stick, and those designed for throwing, usually referred to as javelins. Now, there was no J before the year 1300s, and the origin of that word comes from Yav Elin, and Yav Elin is Yah, of course, is like the God of the Bible and stuff. El is again the Canaanite god, and Yah is really more of like a word of wrath. And so you end up getting like the wrath of El. They throw these things. It comes from a uh, root that is from Mesopotamia and the Levant area, in between there, more down in that area. The spear has been used throughout human history, both as a hunting and fishing tool and as a weapon, along with axes, knives, and clubs. It's one of the earliest, most important tools developed by early humans as a weapon. It may be wielded with either one hand or two. It was used in virtually every conflict up until the modern era, where even then it continues on in the form of bayonets. It's probably the most common used weapon in history, and its variations. Now, the origins of it, spear manufacture and use is not confined to humans. It's also practiced by the Western chimpanzee. Chimpanzees near Togo, Senegal, have been observed to create spears by breaking straight limbs, selected these exact limbs, stripping them of their bark and side branches, and sharpening one end with their teeth. They then use the weapons to hunt galagos sleeping in the hollows. Galagos is like this, I don't know, lemur monkey kind of creature, one of those big eye type things, right? Bush babies, magpies. So, in prehistory, archaeological evidence found in present day Germany documents that wooden spears have been used for hunting since at least 400,000 years ago. And a 2012 study suggests that Homo Heidelburgensis may have developed the technology about 500,000 years ago, half a million years ago. Wood does not preserve well, however, and Craig Stannard, a primatologist and professor of anthropology at the University of Southern California, has suggested that the discovery of spear use by chimpanzees probably means that early humans used wooden spears as well, perhaps 5 million years ago or more, but we don't find the remnant of them because it's all disintegrated away, and rarely, if any of them, would have ever turned into something that's like a petrified wood, although they have found petrified wood made into spear points. Now, Neanderthals were constructing stone spearheads from as early as 300,000 BP, and by 250,000 years ago, wooden spears were made with fire-hardened points from circa, and they can just straight date that. I mean, it's carbon on a wood of a stick. From circa 200,000 BC onwards, Middle Paleolithic humans began to make complex stone blades for flaked edges, which were used as spearheads. These stone heads could be fixed to the spear shaft by gums or resin, or by bindings made of animal sinews, or combination efforts. Leather strips or vegetable matter also. During this period, a clear difference remained between spears designed to be thrown and those designed to be used in hand-to-hand combat. By the Magdalenian period, about 15,000 to 9,500 BC, spear throwers that are similar to the atlatl were in use. The atlatl is the extra stick that you attach onto the back of it, and holding onto it are able to fling it much harder than you currently can. Really helps in getting some distance out of it, and even up short, it puts a lot more punch behind it than you have. Of course, it requires a whole different skill set to run these things. And Greeks. The spear is the main weapon of the warriors of Homer's Iliad. The use of both single thrusting spears and two throwing spears are mentioned. It has been suggested that the two styles of combat are being described are an early style of thrusting spears dated to the Mycenaean period in which the Iliad is set, and anachronistically a later style with throwing spears from Homer's own archaic period. In the 7th century BC, Greeks were evolved a new close order infantry formation called the phalanx. The key to this formation was the hoplite, who was equipped with a large circular bronze-faced shield called a hoplon, and which was huge, a 7 to 9 foot spear with an iron head with a bronze bull spike called a doro, or a bronze butt-end spike called a doro. The hoplite phalanx dominated warfare through the Greek city-states from the 7th to the 4th century BC. Then there started being a lot more cavalry combat and chariots and things, and it kind of ruined it, and it relegated this type of fighting to a portion of combat that would come in at a certain point, and indeed all the people seemed to, if they had horses involved at all, began it with this type of thing, volleys of arrows, volleys of spears, and then would come in. So in the pre-Marian Roman armies, the first two lines of battle, the Hestate and Principes, often fought with a sword called a gladius and a pila, heavy javelins that were specifically designed to be thrown at an enemy and to pierce and foul a target's shield. Originally, the Principes were armed with a short spear called a hasta, but these gradually fell out of use, eventually being replaced by the gladius. The third line, the triarii, continued to use the hasta. From the late 2nd BC on, all legionaries were equipped with a pilum. A pilum continued to be a standard legionary spear until the 2nd century. Axilia, however, were equipped with a simple hasta and perhaps throwing spears. During the 3rd century AD, although the pilum continued to be used, legionnaires were equipped with other forms of throwing and thrusting spears and so on. It slowly came to be a lesser part of use, but then again, in this same combat idea, you started to have people using lances, where something like this guy looking here on the horse here itself could use this as a lance off of his horse, coming up on anybody if he needed to from the ground if he jumped off the horse, and it could be thrown, but it's not really made for such. Now let me show you something else here before we go all off into the infantry and Western Europeans and of course Syrian soldiers here holding them way back in 740 BC, but they go back much farther than that. We've already seen that. Asia has ones. Once they got into the Bronze Age, they had capsularied ones. All the Europeans had ones where they tip, and on the end of it, One of the big innovations was to put a hole through the end of that and then drive another spire through it, so it really couldn't come off the end. It was amazing little, thing, but it took, thousands and thousands of years to get to that point with it. And once we got the spear perfected, it sadly kind of fell into second guise there once gunpowder and things came in. But like described earlier, it really stayed in combat pretty much up until the modern era. One thing of note they found here, recently, or not so recently, but they're starting to collect more and more of them and knowing where to find them. They're generally in burials and things, and it seems to be a specialized weapon, not really used ever in combat, but more ceremonial, are these crystal blades. Now, sure, they make things out of obsidian and other crystal formed rock structures. That's indeed what flint is and all these other things. But this is out of clear crystal, and you can see the affixing mud that they had onto it, even the gap hole bottom where they would have had the spear stuck into there. And this is a 3D picture of it. Let me show you a few more of these. Look at this fine specimen here. Beautiful spearhead point. Still has some of the gum type stuff that's attached, or did attach it at one time to a handle type apparatus that they had for it. And it was more of like a dagger spear that they had in a ceremonial burial. All made out of this clear crystal. I mean, it's almost harkens to the idea of the crystal skulls, and things like that that you see that's supposed to go back to way in antiquity. And you see that they have use and are doing this at this time out of large pieces of crystal, large quartz crystals, filing them all the way down to this point. They're not finding sheaves of them and then just chipping the edges. This is all manufactured out of a larger crystal piece. So you have to find a large crystal like this, and this one is impressive. It's almost a foot long, but then again, that's what it would take to even make that one that we just saw, and someone would have to sheave it off correctly, and then all the workmanship from there without ruining it to get it to the point of having a blade out of something like this. I think it's quite incredible. I mean, you look at some of their arrowhead points and stuff, and you go, yeah, we knew about that. You've known about it so much, you kind of just flash in the pan it, but there you go. Look at something like this, and it kind of changes your ideals of what's going on here somewhat. And this is that atlatl that I spoke of right here, and you can see this extra bent stick with a notch held into it, and it holds the back of your spear. And of course, once you get one up to this velocity, at the same time, you have to be putting on tails onto this thing to really keep it from going off in left field and keeping it suspended. And this, at the same time, here comes bows and arrows. And who knows what came first, the little one-stringed harp, or somebody stuck a little stick and made a little fake one of these for their kids, somehow put it on the harp and went doing, and it shot it, and somebody got an idea and started making small ones of these that had the feathered back and attaching them to the front. There's a lot of conjecture on how bows come about, but it looks like something along that line may have happened, that it actually took music first. For who would put a sinew across something like that, the thing that we use as a bow to end up using to make fire actually seems to have come later than the bow to actually shoot. In fact, just a loose stringed bow can be actually used to make fire very easily. You just coil it around the stick and then rattle it back and forth as you're holding it from the top. It's that simple. I mean, some of the ones they find right here almost look like a work of art. You could put that on your mantle. And of course, I'm not sure what the value of these things are, but I'm sure collectors, it's got to be way up there. And to find one of this quality and this size, this thing is a foot long. How much would that be worth? You have something from 30,000 years ago that's made out of crystal. It's a crystal arrowhead from caveman. I think that's just incredible. Anyhow, there we go with spears and its origins, and it's not something that comes back from just 10,000 years ago or something. It comes from way, way long ago. People had that tech a long, long time ago. It's a different look at history than we're normally taught. Peace.